Our next presentation will address how safety and health accident investigation and analyze hazards. Our presenter is Doug Fletcher. Doug is the president of Fletcher Consulting here in Omaha. He's worked as a safety and health professional for over 30 years. Formerly a certified safety professional and a certified industrial hygienist, Doug started Fletcher Safety Consulting with the intention of helping his clients produce their products and provide their services more safely. Prior to starting Fletcher Safety, Doug worked for 17 years in the federal OSHA office in the Omaha area. Doug, thank you for joining us.
All right. Is it on, as we say? Am I too loud? Okay. Is that all right? Okay, very good. Thank you for the invitation, man. I appreciate it. I didn't think after the last time you would ask me back, but it is good to be here. It's good to see some familiar faces, reacquaint with some folks I haven't seen for a while. So again, thank you for having me back. I'm not talking about any of that stuff that he just said. I was actually out of town this past weekend. I went and visited my son. I have a son that lives in Colorado, so my wife and I and another son went out to Colorado, visited my kid, spent a few days out there, got back Sunday evening, checked my day planner and said, I think I'm giving a presentation on Tuesday. So I put this together on the drive down here from Gretna. For those of you from the area, you know that gave me about 30 minutes to put this together. So, but you know. Colorado is kind of interesting. I don't have any submarine stories. I wish I did. Those are fascinating, although I'm not sure I could be on a submarine. Colorado, we went to a little town called Ouray. I don't know if you've ever been to Ouray. It's kind of by Telluride. It's kind of down in the south central Colorado area. There's a road that goes from Ouray to Silverton called the $1 Million Highway. Has anybody ever been on the $1 Million Highway? Okay, so this road is carved into the side of the mountain. It just drives out of Ouray, and then just literally there's mountain, there's oncoming traffic, there's a yellow line, there's your lane, and then there's a 2,000-foot drop into the abyss. There are no guardrails, there's no shoulder. It is just a white line that designates your limits. And in some places, even that white line is decayed. It started to drop off, so you've got less than an actual lane. And my 24-year-old kid is driving us up there, and he lives in the mountains, so he just drives it like this, and he's looking back, talking to his mother, and I am in the passenger seat. I've got a hold of that little grabby thing, you know, and I'm leaning in, hoping that my body weight will keep us on, you know, on the road. Oh my God. It reminded me of getting on top of some of your concrete elevators, in fact, which I cannot do. You know, I'm the guy that gets off the lift, step out onto the elevator, and then back up against the wall and look, and okay, we've got a guardrail, everything's good. You know, so anyway. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. As was mentioned briefly, I've been doing this for a long time now. I talked with Jeff over here about, he actually took me out to lunch like the first week that I started consulting. I'd been with the federal government for 25 years. I did a 7-year stint with the DOD as an industrial hygienist, and then I worked for the Department of Labor for 18 years for OSHA. Jess and I were colleagues. We overlapped for a period of time with the agency. And then I left OSHA. I spent, I think, about 5 years as a compliance officer. And then I became the compliance assistant specialist, which was a new position for the agency at the time. John Henshaw was the assistant secretary, and he created this outreach position for us. And I really enjoyed that position. I don't have a temperament to be an enforcement guy. It was not easy for me to be an enforcement guy. Had a lot of philosophical issues with the agency. Got this position as an outreach person, and I really enjoyed that very much. And of course, therefore, they transferred me back into enforcement, which is why I was confronted with the opportunity to become the area director here in Nebraska, or not. That was really the option. And so I quit after 25 years with the government. My wife was like, "You what?" I quit. I just turned in my resignation. She's like, "Oh shit, oh God," what, you know, as she does often. But I started doing this self-employment thing, and Jeff took me to lunch, and we talked about it, and I actually let him pay for my lunch, and we actually had a few drinks. It was Friday afternoon, and I walked out of the restaurant, and I was like, I love this consulting stuff, man. This is awesome, so thank you very much, because the rest has been fantastic. I have learned 3 things about working safely and our efforts toward working safely. There are a number of compartments to what we do. One of those is compliance. And that is an inevitable and perhaps unfortunate part of what we have to do, but we are, if you work in the United States, you have to be compliant with OSHA regulations as a bare minimum, certainly. That can be very challenging, and that's oftentimes what I assist people with, is the compliance piece. We also have to address the injuries that are hurting our employees. And those usually aren't the things that are on your list of citations. If you look at your 300 logs and the things that we're recording on our 300 logs, and the doctor talked about recordability, those aren't oftentimes the things we're being cited for aren't oftentimes the things we're finding on our 300 logs. We're finding strains and sprains, perhaps, maybe foreign bodies and eyes, maybe lacerations, maybe some other things. But the things that are hitting that 300 log are different than the things we get cited for, and we have to address both of those. And unfortunately, there is a distinction between the two. I can remember going to a record-keeping class when Dave Schmidt and Jim Maddox, those guys rolled out the new record-keeping standard. And we were talking about the fact that there's such a difference between what we're issuing citations for and what we were seeing on the logs. They estimated it was about a 10% overlap, which I thought, that's kind of weird. So not only do we have to manage for compliance, we have to manage for what's hurting our employees. And then thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, is we have to manage in anticipation of what can go catastrophically wrong. So we do a lot of preventive maintenance. We do a lot of maybe PSM, if that happens to be your world. We do a lot of things to try to prevent catastrophic incidents. Again, the stuff on our log is back strains, laceration, usually. I mean, sometimes more serious. I don't mean to minimize that, but usually those kind of things, sprains and strains, things like that. But the things that can go seriously wrong at our facilities, and at every one of your facilities, there is the potential certainly for catastrophic incident, whether that's explosion or engulfment or things like that. Those things are always there. There is very little overlap there as well. So you have a DART rate perhaps of 0, which is commendable. We celebrate that. We haven't had a lost time injury in 384 days. That's outstanding. But that doesn't mean that we're necessarily safe, nor does it necessarily mean that we have addressed these issues that could be highly significant. We've addressed the things that hit the log. We've addressed sprains and strains pretty well. Maybe we've eliminated lacerations. Everybody's wearing gloves now. Don't have any foreign bodies and eyes. We're not doing those things. That's good. But there is always that potential for much more significant issues that might go unnoticed. We have this heat illness campaign that you're going to talk about more tomorrow, I believe, with Aaron, which would be really interesting. I'd love to be able to hear that. I might come back if I can and just sit in on that. We're doing those kind of things, but are we doing regular PMs? Are we evaluating our workplaces for those potential catastrophic issues? Hopefully we are. I know in the 272 standard, OSHA does require that we do preventive maintenance, things of that nature that are intended to address that element of our working safely efforts. So, as an OSHA guy, like I said, I was with OSHA for about 18 years, and I've been self-employed for about 9 years. I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of incident investigations over that time period, which was interesting. I'm looking at a little cheat screen here, which is really nice because usually I'm looking down at my laptop trying to read it. So this is actually pretty cool. This is a typical incident investigation, right? What was happening prior to the incident? The employee was working. Okay, what happened? The employee stuck his head where it didn't belong. What is the corrective action? I counseled the employee not to stick his head there. How many of you have written that incident investigation? I mean, I'm not making, this is actually what most of them look like. Okay, the employee did something stupid, and I've instructed the employee not to do anything stupid in the future. Okay, that's part of it, perhaps. So I mentioned to my good buddy James Clark, who's sitting back here somewhere, or maybe he moved. So I told him I was going to mention his name. Over the weekend, I was reading. I don't read typically. 25 years with the government, probably not a surprise, but not a reader necessarily. I like the YouTube, where that person talks to you on the screen. I like the YouTube thing. I saw this dude on YouTube. I think the algorithm I must have Googled something about safety inadvertently. And now the algorithm knows that I'm interested in safety, so it populates safety things periodically, and this guy named Sidney Decker came up. Some of you are familiar with Sidney Decker. Some of you are. And he was talking about viewing safety differently. And I have always viewed safety differently. I think that was part of my conflict with OSHA, was that it just didn't make sense to me the way OSHA did it. And that means no disrespect to the agency. I have a lot of friends in the agency, former coworkers. I respect how difficult that job is, but it always was a problem for me. So I went out and bought some books from Sidney, and he talks about the 4 principles of safety differently. And he says, safety is not defined by the absence of accidents, but by the presence of capacity, which I thought was a really interesting statement. We always focus on the absence of accidents, right? The absence of incidents, that's a success. We have 0 injuries, we had 0 incidents. That's our DART rate, 0, whatever that is. And that's how the metrics that we use to measure success in this. Really, safety is just the presence of capacity. Do we have the controls, the resources, the knowledge to be able to tolerate deviations in our work environment so that we don't have catastrophic issues? The doctor, again, said some really interesting things. He talked about, I had working with SEALs or working with nuclear subs, he had a limitless budget. Obviously, they had the capacity and they built in the controls to ensure that when they had deviations from the norm, they didn't have catastrophic incidents. Workers are not the problem, they are the problem solvers. We all understand this. I think we all agree to this. But as an OSHA guy, as an OSHA investigator, when you start asking, why did you do that? I've got you in, we're sitting there in the room, no management representatives because I don't want to I don't want them present. I'm asking you, why did you do that? What kind of training did you have? And I'm interrogating you and you're like, oh, I'm in deep shit. I did something wrong. I'm going to get in trouble for this. That is kind of this predisposition to the fact that the employee must have done something wrong. The employer certainly wants the investigation to go that way. The employer is certainly biased in that direction. Yeah, the employee did something wrong. So when we think about incident investigation, I think it's important that we think from the perspective that let's not start with a bias toward the employee did something wrong, okay? In fact, when we're looking for solutions, the workers typically have the solutions. As a consultant, you pay me a ridiculous amount of money to go stand in your workplaces and watch your employees work. Okay, and that's what I do. I go into workplaces and I watch the employees work. I'll stand there for hours watching them work, just talking to them, chatting with them. What are you doing? Explain this to me. Why do you do that? And I know the guys that are paying me are in there going, what am I paying this guy for? God damn, he's been standing out there for hours. Why don't you do something? But the point is, it's important that somebody know how they perform their work. Could be you as the employer, maybe not. could be me as a consultant. They certainly know how they perform their work, and that is really valuable information, okay? We don't constrain workers in order to create safety. Putting a bunch of rules and stipulations and procedures and just laying all that heavy stuff on them. We ask workers what they need to do their work safely, reliably, and productively. What do you need in order to do this work well? What do you need in order to get the outcome that we're looking for? I think that's an important question. And usually we just put together a safety manual, we put a bunch of rules in there, we hand it to them, and we say, go do your job, and here's the rules. And those constraints oftentimes are more of a problem than a help. Safety doesn't prevent bad things from happening. Safety ensures good things happen while workers do work in complex and adaptive work environments. Bad things are going to happen. Bad things happen every day in your work environments. Mistakes are made every day in your work environments. And if we have the capacity built in, we can tolerate those mistakes, all right? So Sidney Decker, I mean, if you're not familiar with the guy, go YouTube him or buy the books or something. As James and I were talking, you know, he's a little too smart maybe at times. He kind of a little over my head at times, but I found it really interesting, which is why I wrote this up this morning. 5 principles of human performance. So this is the other guy, Todd Conklin. Anybody heard of Todd Conklin? PhD, Todd Conklin? Yeah, some of you have. I think the speaker this morning actually referenced him, mentioned Todd Conklin, human performance. Really interesting stuff. Error is normal. Error is normal. I was watching something up that he gave the other day. He said the average worker, the guy out there, he or her who are, I've got pronoun issues. The person out there doing the work makes 5 to 7 mistakes an hour. The person in the office probably makes 15 to 20 mistakes an hour. Error is normal. And an error, by their definition, is the unintentional deviation from the preferred behavior. So you do something unintentional that deviates from the behavior that we want. Wow. That's a lot of errors are happening all the time. Blame fixes nothing. This speaks right to the point of this incident investigation. Blame fixes nothing. And I know with OSHA, we were quick to blame. In fact, with OSHA, we were quick to blame the employer oftentimes. We would come to the support of the employee and we would blame the employer. You know, it's your fault, you know. That doesn't get us where we need to be. When we do incident investigations, if you start from a position of blame, you're going to end up with pretty worthless information. Learning and improving are vital. Context influences behavior. This is a huge concept, huge idea. Context influences behavior. I think we see this every day too, that employees do things at work that we might not have instructed them to do, we might not have wanted them to do, but they are adapting to the environment that we have put them in, utilizing procedures that we have provided them and equipment that we've provided them, and whatever that context is, they are going to adapt to it so that they can get the work done. And sometimes that means violating our procedures or policies. They believe that's the correct approach, that's the desired approach, and that leads us to bad outcomes sometimes. So the context is really important. How you respond to failure matters. This was intended for employers, but employees as well, but how you respond to failure matters. Are we going to blame? Are we going to learn and grow? It's kind of an interesting concept. So error is normal. Your best employees and your worst employees make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I'm not going to read through all of these because you're going to go out and watch this guy on YouTube or buy the book. I don't get a cut, but I think it's worth having if you are involved in safety at all. Good systems build in error tolerance. okay? I used to tell people used to bitch at me all the time about the OSHA regulations. This is stupid, Doug. Why do I have to do this, Doug? You know, as if I wrote the regulations. You know, I was just there to enforce the regulations. You know, we took a lot of crap for that. But when things are going well, when the system is flowing, when everything is going smoothly, the OSHA regulations aren't really all that important. You know, guarding a machine, wearing fall protection, whatever that happens to be. If everything's going well, your employees are focused, they're on their game, everything is going smoothly, complying with the OSHA regulations aren't a big deal. It's a big deal when there's that deviation. You know, when you're not focused, when you're tired, when you are distracted, and, you know, the piece in the press falls off of the jig and you reach for it inadvertently, and you trip the light curtain and the machine stops before it cuts your hand off. That is building capacity into the system that can tolerate error. Because even as a consultant, I can't tell you how many light curtains I've tripped just walking through facilities and saying, what's that over there? And I just ran my hand through a light curtain or something, and there's, you know. So good systems build in error tolerance. That's really important. Errors are not choices. I think that's an important concept too. Errors are not choices. That's interesting. I know that from time to time our employees do things and we're just baffled. Why would you do such a thing, you know? But when you think about error precursors, this is something that Dr. Conklin put in the book. Error precursors, time pressure, workload, interruptions, distractions, fatigue, unfamiliarity, stress, frustration, complacency. God, that's our workforce every day, right? This is every day. You can't get away from this stuff. So the precursors to error are constantly there, all right? Planners, managers, and designers make two enormous assumptions. This is from the book. Every day is the same, and process variability will be identified and driven out of the work before the worker starts the task. We're assuming that every day is going to be the same. Our employees are going to behave perfectly. They're going to follow the procedures correctly. The equipment is going to perform the way we intended it to. I think that's an untruth. And then workers perform consistently and perfectly every time the work is done. There's a mistaken belief that the worker will exhibit machine reliability. And I think these are true statements, unfortunately. I see this quite often, okay? Every day is not the same. Near miss. We talk a lot about near misses in our world. We like near miss information. That's useful information. We encourage people to report near misses. Dr. Conklin gave an example of a company, a shipping company. They pick up super sacks and they swing them from a position from the truck and they put them on the ship. They're swinging these super sacks with a crane over and over and over all day. They're very good at it. They've laid out an area where no employee can enter because that is the path of the crane's travel. So this area on the floor or on the ground here is demarcated. Do not enter. On one occasion, the company receives a piece of equipment to ship that does not fit in a super sack. All they do is super sacks. So on this occasion, they take the super sack and they wrap it around the piece of equipment and connect it to the hook of the crane. And as they pick it and they're moving it, it falls, drops to the ground. Nobody gets hurt. Is that a success or a failure? Thoughts? Kind of both, yeah. I mean, nobody got hurt. That's a success. Nobody was in the drop zone. Success. The rigging didn't work out, so that didn't work so well perhaps, but sometimes the near misses are successes. They're opportunities to learn. They reinforce the fact that the tolerances we have built into the system have worked. We have capacity. That's kind of an interesting comment. I thought that was fascinating. Were we good or were we lucky? You know, that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Did we just get lucky here, or did we have that capacity built in so that we were actually good? So when we look at our systems, you know, how fragile are our systems? If something goes wrong and there's a deviation, are we going to have a bad outcome? Or our systems designed, our processes designed, procedures, so that when we have the error that we know is going to happen, we don't have a bad outcome. Capacity, the ability of a system or process to contain failure without significant consequence. I like that. Blame fixes nothing. I'm not going to go through, I'm going to spare you that. But the last line was interesting. This was just an example given in the book. If you disapprove of your daughter's first boyfriend, you will never get to meet the second boyfriend, right? Blame fixes nothing. If you blame employees for problems, they are never going to share stuff with you again. You've just ended the line of communication. So if your incident investigations are about assigning blame, you're not going to get much cooperation, you know? So, brilliant. An incident investigation truth. Don't limit yourself to the quest for worker error or procedural non-compliance, because you're always going to find both. Every time. Don't limit your incident investigation to a quest for worker blame or error or procedural non-compliance. You didn't follow the rule. You made a mistake, because it's always going to be there. There is something systemic, almost always, that is the underlying problem, okay? Dr. Conklin's recommendation is start your investigation with the system and then look at the behavior, okay? Because I'm not gonna stand up here and tell you there's no behavioral component to this. But start with the system, do your investigation of the systems, the procedures, and then look at the behaviors. Not the other way. We typically look at the behavior first. And I think that's the point they're trying to make as being problematic. Learning and improving are vital. Organizations have two choices when responding to failure. Learn and improve, or blame and punish. That's a big statement. Learn and improve, or blame and punish, okay? And knowing how the work is actually done is why I go out, and when I go to my clients' facilities and I watch the guys work, I spend time with them, I do some work if I'm allowed or able or that motivated, but knowing how it's performed makes a difference. I've got a buddy named Aaron Cerrone. How many of you listen to my podcast? I should expect all hands to go up. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you about it at the end. Shamelessly self-promote something that makes me no money. My wife is like, what are you doing? But Aaron is a friend of mine. He's a small business owner. He's in the military. He teaches over at the university in town. He's kind of a leadership guy. I work out with Aaron. He owns a gym in town. And I can remember one time we were just working out one day, and I was talking about some incident that one of my clients had suffered, and I'd been over there doing an investigation, and he's like, Doug, there's only 3 reasons we have incidents, accidents. Number 1, we don't have a procedure. Number 2, we have a flawed procedure. Number 3, our training sucks. Those are the only 3 reasons and this guy's a business guy. He's like an Air Force guy, you know? I mean, he doesn't know anything about what I do or what we do as safety people, but he was right on the money. Procedure, bad. Procedure, non-existent. Training, bad. That's why we have incidents, and that's perhaps an oversimplification, but we do these leadership trainings together, and his comment was, if we ask what happened or who screwed up, if that's the first question out of our mouths when we hear about an incident, we're letting our ego get in the way, okay? If we ask, is everyone all right, and how did we fail, our ego is in check. I thought that was a pretty interesting comment. How did we fail? Context influences behavior. Workers do what they do for a reason, and the reason makes sense to the worker given the context. That's a good one. When we're working, I used to go into facilities, and you would see the modifications that the employees make to the line, to the process. They've taped something, they've cardboarded something, they put some foam somewhere, they covered something, because they've been put in a situation where the system, the equipment, the process doesn't work. And so they make modifications in order to make the process work. And we have to be cognizant of that. They do what they do for a reason. I think most of them are trying to get product out the door or accomplish the tasks they've been assigned. And we put them in a situation oftentimes where that's challenging, and so they do things for a reason. We need to understand why. Why did you do that? Not you're an idiot, you know, but what have I done that has put you in a position where you feel like you need to do that? Or it could be as simple as, we talk about things, I was at a facility one time that was really good about putting the PPE that they were asking the employees to use at the point of use, rather than keeping everything back at the maintenance shop or in a locker in the locker room or at a bunker, a toolbox or something. The PPE was at the point of use. It was clean. It was enclosed. You know, the fall protection was all hung right here. This is where I needed it. The face protection was right here. This is where I'm mixing chemicals. My face shield and stuff, or my goggles are right there. They're clean. They're usable. We don't give the employees a reason to ignore using it, you know, because I was at a construction site one time, like on the 3rd floor, one of my clients, on the 3rd floor, there's a kid with a little chop saw chopping 2x4s. He didn't have safety glasses on. He'd slide the 2x4 over, line it up, turn his head, chop. Slide it over, line it up, turn his head, chop. I was just waiting for his thumb to come off because I knew his thumb was coming off. I probably shouldn't have waited. That's not a great safety consultant approach. But I was just fascinated by this. Chop. And I was, you know, so I went up to the kid and I was like, I know these guys give you safety glasses. Where's your safety glasses? And he's like, well, they're down in my truck. I left them in my truck. I forgot them in my truck this morning. He's on the 3rd floor. It had to be 3 minutes to go down and get them. But it wasn't convenient, you know, it wasn't. I think perhaps his perception was either this wasn't very hazardous, or maybe he would get in trouble if he left his work assigned area to go down and get them. But it didn't seem rational. Local rationale is information to be discovered, not to be weaponized. Local rationale. So at your workplace, people do things a certain way, and we want to know why. It informs us. It's not intended to be something to beat the guys up with. I have a client up in Norfolk Iron and Metal, and they had a program up there at one time called Acceptable Exposure Program. And what they were interested in doing is identifying in their facility the actions, the activities that the employees were engaged in that were unsafe but had become part of the culture, right? And we all have those things. We have adapted to the work, and this is how I do it, and yeah, I know I'm not supposed to get up on that flatbed, or I'm not supposed to reach under that bundle of metal or whatever, but I gotta pull the chain through. So they had basically, over the course of many years, created all these exposures that they just deemed acceptable because that's how we do it here. And they went on a mission to try to identify those things to see if they could make it safer, make it better. Acceptable Exposure Program. And my friend that was involved in the implementation, Mike Froberg, who used to be up at Norfolk Iron and Metal, said that, you know, if you brought one of these forward, they would reward you in some fashion, you know, a nominal gift card or something, just to bring it forward, and then they would bring it to, they would get a group together, because those solutions tend to come out of groups better, involve the operators and the safety people, and they'd get together and talk about it. Why do we do it this way? And hopefully they could come up with solutions. And he said, you know, in the course of a year, they had received about 165 of these activities that were probably not advisable, but were common to their culture. And of that, like of the 165, they were able to correct probably 150 of them. Nobody got in trouble. There was nothing punitive about it. The maintenance guys really enjoyed actually the challenge of finding ways to do these things more safely. And you know, what that does to your culture, I couldn't even estimate it, but it sounded phenomenal. So I like things like that. How you respond to failure matters. Get better or get even, you know. I used to work for OSHA. There was a lot of getting even at OSHA. You know, I didn't love that part of the agency. I loved the work. I mean, who wrote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times"? The Tale of Two Cities, who wrote that? Dickens, thank you. I was not a literature major. But in my view, OSHA was the best of times and the worst of times, because there were things about OSHA that I loved. You know, particularly things like this, the interaction, the opportunity to meet people, to learn. Man, I learned a lot about safety by watching you guys and having you share stuff with me. There were some difficult moments as well. So, you should make learning easy, because what we are going to learn is often messy. I thought that was an interesting comment in the book. Make learning easy, because what we're going to learn, oftentimes we're going to learn that we've kind of let our employees down, or we've put our employees in a difficult position, or we've created procedures that aren't feasible or usable. So when you turn this on yourself, when you turn that lens on the system rather than the employee, when you're doing these incident investigations, sometimes we find things that maybe aren't all that comfortable necessarily, but again, useful. I've got a buddy in town here, another safety professional. He told me one time, and I didn't really understand it when he said it. He told me that he believed there were only 2 reasons to punish an employee. And OSHA's big on progressive discipline, as you know. I mean, if you want to be able to make the affirmative defense of employee misconduct, you have to have a discipline program. OSHA wants this progressive discipline program. And so we get really hung up on, well, he wasn't wearing his safety glasses. What, did you write him up? I mean, you know, we get really into that. But then Jim told me he believes there's only 2 reasons, lying and insubordination, that you would actually punish an employee. I didn't really get that until I started reading these books and not realizing necessarily, but maybe elucidating the fact that maybe there is a systemic reason why my employee does something that I've not asked them to do or ill-advised, you know? And so while we do, and again, I just read the book this weekend, so I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with everything just yet, but a lot of it makes sense to me. You have to have a discipline program if you want to be in OSHA's good graces. And there are occasions when you need to use it, certainly. But blame doesn't always get us where we want to be. Now, the methodology for doing incident investigations, I'm not here to teach you. I mean, I am, but I'm not going to teach you how to do an incident investigation. I actually am here. That's what Jess asked me to talk about. This will be my last invitation. But there are so many different ways to do incident investigation. When I was with OSHA, they sent me to the Training Institute in Chicago for 4 weeks. I took 2 weeks of accident investigation and then 2 weeks of advanced accident investigation. And we sat there, we did scenarios, case studies. You know, we would put our little sticky thing, our white sheets on the wall, and we would draw a timeline, and we would put little sticky notes up. And then I got back to the area office, and they said, I need you to go out to Scottsbluff and do a fatality investigation tomorrow, and then I need you over here on Wednesday. And I'm like, so I get 3 hours to do the investigation. Yeah, that's about it. Okay. I mean, all of that 4 weeks of, you know, learning the different methodologies and stuff, it's not always practical. I mean, maybe on a nuclear submarine or something, they bring in a team of highly trained investigators and they can do that. But most of us don't have that luxury. Most of us, you know, you got a few hours maybe to dig in and try to find some causation. We use a lot of the 5 whys. That was one of the, that you kind of defer to almost. You know, ask one more why. There is a really, I would have put it up here, but there's a YouTube video of Louis C.K., who is a comedian to some, and he has this, there is a video of him with his daughter in the TV show sitting at the breakfast table. And, you know, she's asking him, can we go outside and play, Daddy? It might be better if you actually watched it on the YouTube, but can we go out and play, Daddy? It's 5 in the morning, honey, we can't go out. Why? Well, it's dark out. Why? Well, after about 20 whys from his daughter, he's admitting to the fact that he smoked pot in high school and dropped out of school, and now he's, you know, it is hilarious, but it really drives home the point that just ask why one more time sometimes. You know, the employee did something stupid. Okay, well, that's my findings and that's my correction. If you ask why one more time, oftentimes that'll lead you to that systemic issue that we know is probably there, right? So that's my advice. OSHA's mantra under Dr. Michaels was find hazards, fix hazards, which I agree with. But why are the hazards arising in the first place? That ultimately is something that we need to dig into. Not just find them and fix them. You're going to be repeating that over and over. Why are they occurring in the first place? You know, why are the employees leaving the forklift? Fork's elevated. Don't make shit up. Why do investigations? Why do we do these incident investigations? What do we investigate? What do you guys investigate, just out of curiosity? I'm assuming that fatalities will top the list, serious accidents. What else do you investigate? Do you investigate near misses if you have an opportunity? If you get that information? Yeah, hopefully. I mean, we don't get the opportunity to be terribly proactive very often, so if we have an opportunity like that to intercede before we have an actual incident, an injury type incident, that's definitely worth doing. I used to always say, prevent recurrence. You know, OSHA has to be on, you have to notify OSHA within 8 hours of becoming aware of a workplace fatality, and then OSHA, we were expected to respond within 24 hours, be on site to initiate the investigation. OSHA has very strict timelines for that kind of thing. And when people would ask, well, I would always say to prevent recurrence. We don't want another fatality to occur. And then Dr. Conklin in the book said that was wrong. And I was like, I'm an idiot. You know, investigations don't change the work controls. They don't fix broken equipment. They don't fix bad procedures. They don't remove at-risk behaviors. They are not corrective actions. They are simply information gathering opportunities. We want to learn more about our processes and our systems. That's all the incident investigation is. If we can derive a corrective action from that, that's fantastic. Okay? Root cause, we use that term a lot. Root cause, we do root cause analysis. What is the underlying issue that led to this incident? And in my experience, it's not just usually one issue that was precipitant, you know? I mean, it's usually a number of smaller things that lead to these incidents, you know? And so we get pretty heavily focused on the root cause, but, you know, there are probably a lot of causes that we can identify, hopefully, as part of the investigation. I don't have much time, so I'm not going to get into this other than you're familiar with this. Everybody has seen this. You know, this description of near misses, that if you capture 100 near misses, if you're that fortunate, your system works well enough to capture 100 near misses, some of them are minor. The vast majority of them are minor, nor would they have been any worse, you know, had they transpired differently. I mean, I slipped on the curb, I twisted my ankle. That's probably as bad as it was going to get, whether you would call that a near miss or not, or I just, you know. But there are a select number of those near misses that could have been catastrophic. You know, those are the ones that we want to root out, and those are the ones that we really want to investigate further. So when you look at near misses, don't look at the outcome necessarily, look at what the potential consequence of that could have been, and then find those ones that could have been SIFs, serious injuries or fatalities, and drill down into those. Those are an opportunity that we can't pass up, okay? We want to find those. When we talk about catastrophic issues, like in the very beginning of my presentation, you know, sometimes that's how we find those and drill down into those to prevent those. Everybody knows the hierarchy. I don't know why I stuck this in here. I think that was probably about 2 this morning. But, you know, control typically involves more, unless you can just eliminate the hazard completely, control typically involves more than one of these strategies. You know, there might be a need for a substitution and engineering controls. PPE, it would be really nice if we could eliminate the need for PPE because it seems to be really problematic, but it's everywhere. Make corrective actions impactful. Make the right choice the easy choice. That's an interesting comment. I was actually at a client, they had a new safety guy who got fired like the next week, so I didn't get to know him very well. But he told me that he thought making the right choice, the easy choice, was a good approach. And I think it is too. And so does Dr. Conklin. You know, if our employees are going to defer to the easy choice, hopefully that's the right choice. And if we can structure our systems so that's true, that's to our advantage. I'm going to close anticipating very few questions. I'm going to take a few more minutes and close on the OSHA Rapid Response Investigation, the RRI. Is everyone familiar with that? How many of you have had to call your local area office to report a rapid response investigation issue? Some of us have. Yeah, it's not terribly uncommon, unfortunately, but as you know, the program requires us to make notification to OSHA of fatalities, amputations, inpatient hospitalizations for medical treatment, and the loss of an eye, okay? Physical removal of an eye, not an eye injury. And in 37 years of doing this, I've never had to investigate the loss of an eye, but somehow it made the list. I didn't realize it was that big. I mean, it's obviously a problem, but I didn't realize it was that frequent a problem. There's a lot of area director discretion in this. If you've not been through this process, you have an incident that meets the qualifications and you call your local enforcement office to report it. And there is a time frame that you are working within. You must make the call within the time frame. It's not always easy in some circumstances. I've had cases where clients of mine have suffered a hand injury and they don't know yet if it's an amputation or perhaps an avulsion. You know, there's a definitional difference. An amputation is the severing of meat, and an avulsion is the tearing off of meat, and those are different, okay, as OSHA views it. So you don't always know immediately. I've got an employee that's got a bunch of blood, and he's not happy, and we transport him, and he goes to the ER, and I don't know if I have an amputation yet, or an avulsion, or something different, whatever that is. So you don't have to make the call until you have been made aware that you have an amputation. So maybe the medical provider would indicate amputation of, you know, right index finger or whatever the case might be, or avulsion. The language matters. When you deal with your occupational health providers, if you work with an occupational health provider, I think it's important that they understand how consequential this language can be as it impacts us and OSHA, recordability, reporting, things like that. But Matt Thurlby, a friend of mine, is the area director here in Omaha, the Omaha area office. He has the latitude to say, yes, we are going to send an inspector out, or no, we are going to do this investigation through this paperwork exchange. And they have a triage process. They look at the information that you provide on that phone call. They might send you a piece of paper, fill this out, get me some of the details. and then they look at it, and then they determine whether or not it meets any of those criteria. If it's a fatality, they're certainly coming out. If it's a multiple hospitalization event, they're certainly coming out. But man, I've had some instances where they were significant amputations, didn't come out, things like that. So it is up to the area director, and it's oftentimes a resource availability issue. In Nebraska, they have this new pilot program, and it has been implemented in a few other states, but I think Nebraska was only the second or third state where this became available. I think Missouri has it, if I'm not mistaken. The Nebraska Consultation RRI Transfer Program, which if we have a qualifying incident, I have a client that actually participated in this, which is how I know about it. We had an amputation. We called OSHA. We exchanged the requisite information about the incident, and they called us and offered us this transfer to OSHA consultation. So Jim Cover and the guys down in consultation, the non-enforcement program, and OSHA was willing to, if we agreed, they wouldn't send a compliance officer out to the location if we were willing to work with the consultation folks. That seemed like a good deal to me. So we agreed to it. One of the consultants came out, walked through the facility, looked at where the incident took place, made some recommendations, no citations, no penalties, and we actually learned a few things from the consultants that I had not pointed out to them, which I was grateful for, and my employer was very appreciative of that. So if you're in Nebraska or Missouri and you have this opportunity, I thought this was it's kind of a resource thing because the enforcement offices are strapped, and it worked out really well. This is just copies of the paperwork you get if OSHA is doing the rapid response investigation via paperwork. They basically just send you this document. It's a paper investigation. They want you to fill it out. My guidance to my employers, if we have to do this, or if we are given this opportunity, is just a few things. Do an investigation. Make sure that we want OSHA to be comfortable that we have the situation under control. I think when we're exchanging this paperwork, that is most important. So when you're filling out this paperwork, don't use overly inflammatory language. Employee ripped his hand off, bloodiest thing I've ever seen. I have reviewed a few of these before they went to the area office, and I thought, let's not say that, okay? Had a laceration, whatever, I mean, something like that. Be careful about how you communicate to OSHA. Give them assurances that you've got it under control and that you were taking corrective actions. Give them some idea of what corrective actions. You don't have to commit to that stuff necessarily. You just want them to review the paperwork, feel like you've got it under control, you've done a thorough investigation, and they don't need to send someone out to do the on-site portion. Otherwise, as much as I hate to admit it, the documentation is important, okay, from an OSHA standpoint, from a compliance standpoint. It's a little bit different than the investigation that we were talking about, but, for the time being, that we will continue to use these forms for the OSHA stuff. So my time is up, or I'm a little bit maybe beyond time, and so for shameless self-promotion, we've been doing a podcast here locally for about 3 years now, and it's just, one of our sponsors is actually one of my sponsors, Cheyenne. I don't know if Cheyenne Wolford's in the room or not, CCS Group, but he is one of the sponsors of the podcast. I've got a lot of really generous people, but all we do is sit down with safety people and talk about safety. Or we sit down with people that support the safety industry and talk about safety. Or we sit down with leadership people and talk about safety leadership. It has been really fascinating for me. One of the best things I've ever done as a safety professional, because I get to sit down with people that are doing it every day and learn from them. And I have learned so much about new technologies from some of the young safety people who don't do it with a pencil and pad like we have done. When I started with OSHA back in, when did you start? I started in 1996. And when we would go out on site, we would take pictures. Well, actually, we drew diagrams to begin with, stick figures and stuff. Then we got Polaroids. And so we would take pictures of the scene with a Polaroid, and then you would tape it into your case file. And then we got like this big video recorder that was about this big. One guy got to use it, and you would kind of video the scene. We thought, oh shit, man, we are on, you know. And, you know, now these, I mean, you actually have like a camera in your phone. I don't know if you knew that or not, but there's a camera in your phone. I'm out. I'm due to retire. So if you find safety podcasts remotely interesting, here's another one for you. And if you want to be on the podcast, if you have something that you would like to share that you think might be of interest to the group, I would really actually love to get representatives from the industry onto the podcast just to talk about grain hazards and grain solutions and things like that. I think that would be really interesting. Just contact me and we'll set it up. But Jeff and I are about to retire, and we're gonna go off into the dark podcasting, and well, he's not, but I am, and that's gonna be it. So, do you have any questions about any of this stuff? Would anybody like to discuss this further, or are you ready to take a break?
Questions? There's one over here.
They wouldn't let me go to the bathroom. I don't know are we recording? Yeah, is it okay if I go now? Thank you, Mark.
You were talking about disciplinary actions.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, well, I've been in this since 2007, but the two young ladies behind me are the ones that send out all of our safety information every month that we do the trainings on and stuff. But I feel like the employees have us since 2020, and
yes.
I don't feel like I can do disciplinary action with them anymore. Does anybody have any suggestions on?
So are you fearful that they're just going to leave?
They have.
They just cut out.
They just walk. They're just like, screw you, and they just walk out, you know. And
wow.
Our
so
workforce
this is a
18 to 30 on the people I'm talking about. You know, the ones that seem like they're 35 to retirement age, I don't have a problem with. But the younger kids, they're just like, I'm out of here, whatever, you know, and so what's the solution?
So your dilemma is, do I fulfill my obligation to discipline, or do I lose an employee?
Or what happens if OSHA shows up and I don't have a disciplinary action on file like I used to have?
Yeah.
You know, and now OSHA shows up and I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. They're going to walk off.
This is huge, man, because I know this is true for everybody that I deal with. You know, our labor challenges are a big deal, and so I go discipline this kid, you know, he just refuses to wear his PPE. And up to a point, that becomes insubordination. I've told them over and over and over, look, this is required, and they just don't do it. And so now, do I give them a suspension, 3 days with they're not coming back. You know, I just lost a body. I had a plant manager one time. I was walking through a plant, or we were doing a safety committee meeting, and he's like, I can't get the forklift drivers to honk when they go through between buildings. I'm like, what do you mean you can't get them to honk? They won't honk. And I was like, well, fire his ass. He goes, I need a forklift operator. You know, he's my only, I need a forklift operator. I don't have a long line of, so all OSHA will do, I mean, if you have a discipline program in place and you can demonstrate that you use it to some degree, you might be able to make a case. I mean, it's intended to be consistent and uniform. You know, you should levy discipline fairly equally. It's not intended to be a, you know, favoritism thing, unfortunately. But in the absence of a discipline program, you cannot make an affirmative defense argument of employee misconduct. That's how it hurts the employer, is because when an employee does engage in misconduct, and you have all the requisite programs and training and that stuff in place, but no discipline, OSHA will not accept that argument to get you out of a citation. So that's the problem that you have. You know, I don't have a solution. Is anybody doing anything? I'm sure we're all in the same boat. Does anybody have an answer for that? Just discipline them and hope you can find somebody else, or just
go the positive route,
retrain them? Probably worth a try. You know, if we looked at it the way I've been talking about, maybe there's a systemic issue why they are non-compliant with our rules or something. Maybe the rules are untenable. If they follow the rules, it doesn't work. So maybe if we dig and we can find a systemic reason that is leading to this behavior, maybe we can fix that. But if we can't, and it is purely insubordination, those are your options. I'm sorry. I liked it when we could flog them. Just drag them out, you know. When we had people waiting at the door for the job, you could just drag them out, cane them, and then get back to work. But
Fletch.
You guys are still talking? Okay, good.
Jesus.
Yeah, man.
So CRT, how do they decide? Do they have a criteria for that, for the critical response team?
Yes.
And second part to that, is it similar to BPP and SHARP?
So are you talking about that thing I just talked about? So the criteria would be the same triage. So the question is, how does the area office decide of giving that rapid response investigation over to consultation rather than sending out a compliance officer? Again, the triage, you know, category 1, 2, and 3 would take place. So category 1's fatalities, multiple hospitalizations, they're going to investigate. No choice. So we get down into category 2 and category 3. Those are the ones they're going to want to unload. And Jim Cover told me, when the program manager for consultation here in Nebraska, when it first started, the area office gave them all the stuff out in western Nebraska, just because they didn't want to send compliance officers out to Scotts Bluff. That's kind of a shitty. But my guy was in Gretna, which is where half the compliance staff lives. So I think it was just the nature of the injury was such that it didn't seem likely to recur, and so they felt comfortable with consultation doing that investigation, perhaps. Yeah, the category 1 stuff is off the table. Man, if you have to, maybe if you have to report it, just say, hey, we'd like that CRT thing if that's on the table. Yeah, we'd like that perhaps. I think they will do more of that. The more comfortable they become with the program, the more of that will go to Jim and the consultants, which I think is useful. But that doesn't mean you're signed up for a consultation. It only pertains to the location where the injury took place, and they are asked to do a cursory investigation of the incident, but it was very cursory. And then they walked around the area where the incident took place, and they told us we needed to test our GFCI more often, and you know.
What is it like BPP or SHARPS where they give you a timetable?
No.
So you have to fix this within that timetable?
Oh, yes. If there are corrective actions identified, you will get the same structured time frame for completion. Again, in my experience with the Nebraska consultants, that's very flexible. If you need additional time, you can usually get additional time. You know, there's the standard 30 days. That was the default setting on my computer, 30 days abatement, you know. If I didn't override it, that's what you got, 30 days abatement. And I think consultation works similarly. You would give you 30 days if you needed more time. Or if it was one of those things that this is a capital investment that we're not prepared to make at the time. I can only speak for Nebraska, but Cover is a reasonable guy. Yeah, we need you to get rid of all these concrete elevators and put in bins or something. Yeah. I don't think that's going to be a problem in Nebraska. And that's my feeling.
Doug, you going to be around for a little while longer?
I can stick around for a while, absolutely.
All right, so if anyone has questions, come find Doug. I want to make sure to give everyone their break. We're approaching a break here at 3:30.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Me
Doug,
too.
very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.